The morning fog lay thick over the naval base, curling around the steel hulls of docked ships and the neatly aligned barracks. The scent of salt water mixed with the metallic tongue of machinery, a scent familiar to anyone who had spent even a day aboard these grounds. Into this ordered chaos stepped a figure who, at first glance, seemed unremarkable. Evelyn Hart moved with quiet grace, her posture impeccable, but her attire was deliberately understated. A simple uniform with no insignia, sleeves rolled neatly, boots polished to a mirror shine. To most of the personnel bustling past, she was just another new recruit, someone to be noted briefly before fading into the background. Evelyn's eyes, however, missed nothing. Every detail mattered. The way the junior officers hurried with misplaced urgency, the subtle expressions exchanged between senior enlisted personnel. These were the small tells of base life, the unspoken hierarchies and alliances that governed behavior. She noted them silently, walking with the kind of measured calm that suggested neither hurry nor hesitation, yet commanded attention nonetheless. People noticed her presence before they realized it. Some looked away quickly, unsure why a newcomer seemed so different. As she passed the main administrative building, a group of mid-level officers huddled near the coffee station. Their laughter stopped abruptly when they caught sight of her. One of them, L.T. Marcus Doyle, a tall man with the confident swagger of someone used to being the center of attention, leaned slightly toward his colleague. "Here comes another one," he muttered, his voice barely audible but dripping with condescension. "Bet she won't last a week." Petty Officer Jenna Cross, a sharp-eyed officer known for her sarcastic humor and subtle cruelty, smirked. "Delicate little thing," she added. "Might faint if the siren goes off." Their laughter was quiet but sharp, enough for Evelyn to notice, though she gave no outward reaction. Inside, however, a small, amused smile flickered across her face. She had anticipated this reaction. It was expected. Every new face in a rigid environment like this would be judged, underestimated, and dismissed. What mattered was not what others thought, but how they acted once their assumptions failed them. Evelyn's arrival had been anything but ordinary. Despite her quiet demeanor, she had been sent here with a mission no one suspected. She wasn't merely a new recruit, filling a routine administrative slot. She was the newly appointed Admiral, overseeing the entire base, a detail she had deliberately concealed. Her choice to blend in was tactical. By observing the base without revealing her rank, she could see the truth behind the polished exterior of military discipline. She could see who thrived on authority, who hid behind it, and who would crumble under pressure. As she walked, Evelyn mentally catalogued the personalities around her. She noticed an officer struggling with a cumbersome stack of reports, his frustration evident. Without a word, she stepped closer, helping him realign the papers and pointing out a minor but critical filing error. He looked at her, startled by the precision of her observation. "Thanks," he muttered, embarrassed, his earlier arrogance replaced by a fleeting sense of respect. Evelyn offered a small nod and moved on, her actions deliberate but seemingly casual. These small interventions were part of her strategy, subtle ways of measuring competence and integrity without overtly asserting authority. By mid-morning, whispers about the new girl had already begun circulating. Some commented on her quiet confidence. Others dismissed her entirely. The base, like any community, had its hierarchy of influence, and Evelyn was now quietly testing its limits. She watched Marcus and Jenna as they orchestrated small acts of intimidation, blocking hallways, making sarcastic remarks, attempting to draw her into petty conflicts. Each attempt was predictable, almost ritualistic. Evelyn noted them, smiled faintly, and chose inaction. Patience, she knew, would yield far greater results than confrontation. She made her way to the drill yard, where groups of recruits were practicing marching and operational drills. The clatter of boots against concrete echoed through the crisp morning air. Evelyn observed the formations, noting errors in alignment and communication. She caught a junior officer struggling to relay orders clearly, stepping forward to demonstrate the proper technique with a single, precise motion. The change was immediate. The officer, grateful but unaware of her authority, followed her instructions flawlessly. Others watched, impressed by the skill, though they attributed it to experience rather than the quiet power she exuded. Lunch break found her sitting alone at a small table near the mess hall, quietly observing the interactions around her. Conversations buzzed about the upcoming logistics drill, the minor annoyances of base life, and the petty rivalries that seemed to dominate personnel dynamics. Evelyn listened, making mental notes. Leadership, she knew, was not only about strategy and command, it was about understanding people. Observing their habits, their reactions, their judgments would give her insight into both their potential and their flaws. By late afternoon, Evelyn had already begun forming an internal map of the base's social and operational landscape. The clique that had singled her out continued their attempts to provoke, but she remained unflustered. Their words were sharp, but they revealed more about them than about her. She moved through the base with the quiet authority of someone who belonged, even if no one yet realized she was their commanding officer. As the day drew to a close, Evelyn paused at the edge of the dock, watching the sun reflect off the water. She considered the days ahead, the subtle manipulations, the tests of character, and the lessons that would be learned. The officers thought they were assessing her, testing her limits, but the reality was quite different. Evelyn Hart had arrived not to be evaluated, but to evaluate. And the base, in all its rigid order and hidden chaos, was about to discover that appearances could be deceiving. Her gaze lifted to the horizon, the ship swaying gently in the water. The base was alive with activity, brimming with pride, arrogance, and unseen tensions. Evelyn smiled faintly, her mind already anticipating the moment when those who sought to take her down would realize that they had, unknowingly, been stepping into the presence of an admiral. Patience, strategy, and quiet observation had brought her to this point. And the real test, the one that would change the base forever, was only just beginning. By the second day at the base, whispers about the new girl, Evelyn Hart, had begun to circulate in earnest. Despite her quiet demeanor and understated uniform, her composed movements and keen observations had not gone unnoticed. L.T. Marcus Doyle, tall, confident, and accustomed to commanding attention, frowned as he watched her move through the drill yard with the same precision that seasoned officers displayed. Beside him, Petty Officer Jenna Cross smirked, arms crossed over her chest, her eyes gleaming with a thrill of mischief. They had already begun forming a plan. Evelyn was a new face, unknown, untested, and that made her the perfect target. "We need to see what she's made of," Marcus muttered under his breath as they observed her interact with other recruits. "She's too quiet, too controlled. That's suspicious." Jenna leaned in, lowering her voice. "Quiet doesn't mean weak, but it does mean we can push her. See how she cracks under pressure." She grinned. "I say, we start small. Nothing dangerous, just enough to make her slip up. Everyone loves watching a newbie struggle." The pair began quietly orchestrating subtle acts of intimidation. In the mess hall, they deliberately blocked her path, spilling a minor tray of utensils just as she walked by. Evelyn paused for a brief second, bending to pick up the mess and carefully setting each piece back in order, her composure unshaken. A few nearby recruits whispered to one another, impressed by her steadiness, but the clique saw nothing but what they interpreted as meekness. Later, in the administrative offices, Marcus left intentionally confusing paperwork on Evelyn's desk. He grinned when she picked up the stack and started organizing it, meticulously filing documents in the correct order. while quietly muttering a few observations about inconsistencies in the reports. Jenna watched from the doorway, trying to suppress a laugh. "She's too slow," she whispered to Marcus. "This will frustrate her eventually." Evelyn's inner thoughts were calm, almost amused. She recognized the attempts for what they were, a predictable test of patience and ego, the kind that often revealed more about the instigators than the victim. Each subtle act, each whispered remark, was catalogued in her mind. Names, actions, reactions, hidden alliances, all of it carefully noted. These people thought they were the hunters, but Evelyn knew she was observing the battlefield before the fight even began. By mid-afternoon, the tension between the clique and Evelyn had begun to attract the attention of others. A few curious recruits whispered to one another, speculating about the newcomer, who seemed to handle subtle harassment with near-perfect ease. "She's weirdly calm," one said. "Like she knows something we don't." Another replied, "Maybe she's got connections. Or maybe she's just smarter than us." Evelyn, seated quietly in a corner as she reviewed base protocols, heard the murmurs but paid them no mind. She had bigger plans than engaging in petty gossip. That evening, during a routine drill in the yard, the clique decided to escalate. They deliberately miscommunicated a command to a small group of recruits, ensuring that Evelyn would notice the chaos. Soldiers moved out of formation, equipment clattered across the concrete, and a mild sense of panic spread among the untested recruits. Evelyn, observing from a distance, took note of how each officer reacted. Some hesitated, unsure how to respond. Others tried to assert authority, but failed to gain control. The clique looked on, convinced they had created a moment of humiliation for the new girl. Instead, Evelyn stepped forward. Her movements were deliberate but unassuming. With calm authority, she corrected the miscommunication, guiding the recruits back into formation with precise instructions. Her voice carried across the yard steady, unflinching, yet devoid of arrogance. The officers around her, including Marcus and Jenna, froze, taken aback by her clarity and command. The recruits, sensing her confidence, followed her directions immediately. The chaos dissolved, replaced by order, efficiency, and a subtle awe. Marcus's jaw tightened. She handled that too easily, he muttered under his breath, disbelief creeping into his voice. Jenna narrowed her eyes. "That's impossible," she hissed. "She's supposed to be weak. She's supposed to flounder." Evelyn, meanwhile, noted the tension, but made no outward acknowledgement. She understood that their insecurities fueled their behavior, their need to assert dominance, to belittle anyone new who might challenge their carefully maintained hierarchy. It was predictable, and that predictability was useful. By letting them reveal their methods, their personalities, and their flaws, she was learning far more than they could possibly suspect. Back in the administrative offices, Marcus and Jenna convened a quiet meeting to discuss their next steps. "We can't let her get ahead," Marcus said, frustration in his voice. "She's too composed, too observant. If we don't push harder, she'll be untouchable." Jenna frowned. "But everything we've tried so far, it's not working. She's like a ghost. She reacts, she adapts, but she doesn't falter. I've never seen anything like it." Unbeknownst to them, Evelyn had already anticipated these actions. She understood the patterns of human behavior, the arrogance that came with assumed superiority, and the blind spots of those who underestimated others. Every plan they hatched, every petty act of sabotage, was being quietly observed, logged, and analyzed. She would let them continue, just long enough to learn the full extent of their insecurities, before revealing the true scale of her authority. By nightfall, the base was quiet, but Evelyn's mind remained active. She reviewed the day in detail: who had flinched under pressure, who had acted impulsively, who had attempted manipulation, and who had inadvertently revealed their weaknesses. This was intelligence work, of a sort not recorded in manuals or training logs. It was understanding people, their fears, their motives, their pride. And with that knowledge, she knew, the entire hierarchy could be reshaped. Even in her quarters, Evelyn remained alert. She made notes, catalogued incidents, and reflected on the personalities she had encountered. She could almost predict how each officer would react tomorrow, the next week, even the next month. Her presence was not merely to participate, it was to evaluate, to observe, and ultimately to transform the base from within. The final thought before sleep came quietly but firmly. Appearances could be deceiving. Marcus and Jenna thought they controlled the narrative, that the new girl was vulnerable and untested. In reality, they had walked straight into the gaze of an admiral, someone who had not only seen their tactics, but was already steps ahead in every consideration. The base might seem unchanged from the outside, but beneath the surface, a quiet storm was gathering, and when it struck, it would leave no room for arrogance or deception. Tomorrow, Evelyn thought, would be another day of testing. Another day for the clique to show their true selves. Another day for her to observe, learn, and prepare. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. They believed they were testing her. In truth, the entire base, and every officer who thought themselves untouchable, would soon learn exactly who she was. And they wouldn't see it coming. The third day at the naval base began with the same brisk efficiency as always. Boots clattering on concrete, officers barking orders, and the ever-present hum of machinery and distant ship horns. Yet beneath this routine, tension simmered. Evelyn Hart's presence had not gone unnoticed. The small acts of composure and precision she displayed over the previous 2 days had begun to unsettle those who prided themselves on their influence, especially Marcus Doyle and Petty Officer Jenna Cross. Their initial amusement at her quiet demeanor had transformed into something darker, suspicion, frustration, and a need to reclaim the dominance they believed was theirs by default. By mid-morning, rumors began circulating, whispered and amplified through the base's social network. Marcus suggested quietly to a few like-minded officers that Evelyn must have connections to have been placed on the base. "She's too competent for a new recruit," he murmured, low enough that only the closest ears could hear. "Something's not right here. We need to expose her." Jenna, ever the instigator, added her own twist. "Maybe she's hiding her credentials," she said with a sly smirk. "Or maybe she's a prodigy, like one of those famous officers you read about in history books. Either way, I don't like it." They began planting seeds of doubt, subtly questioning Evelyn's competence to anyone who would listen. By lunchtime, whispers had become a mild storm. Some recruits and junior officers wondered if Evelyn truly had experience beyond what they could see. A few officers, noticing the unfolding tension, kept their distance, unsure whether to ally with Marcus and Jenna or with the mysterious newcomer. Evelyn, meanwhile, observed quietly, her expression calm and unreadable. She noted the spread of these rumors and the subtle power plays accompanying them. She did not confront them, did not correct them, and did not show even the slightest sign of irritation. Instead, she took mental notes. Who propagated the rumors, who joined in, who doubted silently, and who remained neutral. She had learned long ago that direct confrontation in such circumstances rarely produced lasting change. The key was observation, patience, and letting people reveal their true selves through their own actions. Later that afternoon, during a logistics review, Evelyn's quiet efficiency became apparent once again. A minor discrepancy in inventory, overlooked by junior officers, had caused a delay in shipment schedules. Where others might have panicked or assigned blame, Evelyn calmly identified the error, corrected it, and implemented a solution it streamlined operations. Recruits watched with quiet amazement, silently recognizing that her skills were exceptional. But Marcus and Jenna only sneered, interpreting her precision as arrogance or showing off. They could not comprehend that her composure was deliberate, strategic, and deeply intentional. By mid-afternoon, the situation escalated. The clique, growing desperate to regain control over the narrative, began planning a coordinated effort to humiliate Evelyn. They decided to create a minor chaos scenario during the evening drill, aiming to make her appear incompetent in front of the entire base. "We'll make her look like a fool," Marcus said, eyes glinting with mischief. "Once she fails, everyone will see she's just a rookie, and we can regain our footing." Jenna nodded, excitement tempered by nerves. "We have to be careful," she added. "If she fixes it too quickly, it'll backfire." They split responsibilities, ensuring that each small act would create confusion without immediate detection. They did not realize that Evelyn had anticipated such tactics from the moment she had arrived. Every subtle manipulation, every whispered insult, and every deliberate oversight had been observed and catalogued. Meanwhile, whispers about Evelyn's competence continued to spread. Some officers, unsure whether to believe the rumors or Evelyn's actions, began watching more closely. They observed how she handled minor crises, how she treated other recruits, and how she navigated the subtle power dynamics of the base. Slowly, a small undercurrent of admiration began to form, though it remained muted under the louder voices of cynicism and envy. Evelyn, ever perceptive, noted this quietly as well. She knew that influence often began not with authority, but with subtle respect earned through action. The evening drill arrived, tense and charged with anticipation. Marcus and Jenna executed their plan, misdirecting junior officers, altering schedules, and creating small but critical errors in logistical instructions. Confusion spread like wildfire, as intended, and the clique watched with barely concealed glee, imagining the moment Evelyn would falter. Yet Evelyn remained calm, moving through the chaos with an almost preternatural awareness. She identified the discrepancies immediately, issuing clear, precise corrections while quietly instructing those who had been misled. Within minutes, the drill stabilized and efficiency returned. The onlookers were stunned. Recruits whispered among themselves, impressed by her composure under pressure. Some officers, who had been quietly observing the unfolding scene, began to reconsider their judgments. Marcus's jaw tightened in frustration. He could not believe that his carefully orchestrated plan had failed. Jenna's smirk faded into disbelief. "How?" she muttered, unable to form a coherent thought. Evelyn, as always, gave no hint of triumph or irritation. Her demeanor was composed, steady, and entirely unreadable. After the drill, Evelyn conducted a subtle debriefing, asking questions and offering guidance without any overt mention of the chaos that had occurred. She highlighted lessons learned and encouraged junior officers to think critically about their roles in preventing similar disruptions in the future. Her calm authority and professional insight impressed those around her, though Marcus and Jenna refused to acknowledge it openly. To them, she was still a new girl, despite evidence to the contrary. Later that night, as the base settled into the quiet hum of evening routines, Evelyn reflected on the day. She reviewed the subtle power dynamics, catalogued the clique's attempts at manipulation, and considered the best way to handle their behavior. It was clear that Marcus and Jenna were driven by a need for dominance, insecurity masked as confidence. They underestimated her, assuming her calm composure was weakness. But Evelyn knew that strength often came in forms unseen, and that the right moment to reveal true authority would amplify its impact exponentially. She also noted the small victories. Officers who had watched quietly and learned, junior recruits who had gained confidence under her guidance, and the subtle shift in morale that her actions had begun to create. Each of these details would serve her in the coming days, building the foundation for a transformation that would ripple throughout the base. Evelyn's inner monologue remained clear and strategic. Patience, observation, and subtle influence were more powerful than direct confrontation. By allowing the clique to reveal their flaws, she was gaining insight into their characters, vulnerabilities, and limits. They thought they controlled the narrative, that the new girl was inexperienced and naive. In reality, she was already steps ahead, preparing for the moment when perception and reality would collide. By the time she retired to her quarters, Evelyn had not only survived the day intact, but had deepened her understanding of the human dynamics at play. The rumors, the manipulation, the underhanded tactics, all of it had become intelligence for her, a map of behavior that would guide her actions moving forward. She understood that the true test of leadership was not in immediate victories, but in shaping the culture, correcting flaws, and revealing authority at the precise moment it would have the greatest effect. As she lay in her bunk, Evelyn allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Marcus and Jenna believed they were orchestrating chaos, manipulating the new recruit for their own amusement. But they had, unknowingly, stepped into the orbit of someone whose authority extended far beyond appearances. She thought of the days ahead, knowing that each test they conducted, each rumor they spread, was only revealing more of themselves. The base might seem unchanged, but beneath the surface, a subtle transformation had already begun. Tomorrow, she reflected, would bring new challenges, new tests, and perhaps new allies and adversaries. But Evelyn Hart was ready. She would watch, she would listen, and she would guide the course of the base without revealing her full hand, at least not until the moment when the truth could no longer be ignored. And in that truth, Marcus, Jenna, and everyone else who thought they controlled the narrative would finally learn what it meant to underestimate the new girl. The base hummed with the mechanical rhythm of daily operations, yet underneath the surface, tension had thickened like storm clouds. Marcus and Jenna, frustrated by Evelyn Hart's unwavering composure, had escalated their plans. After days of subtle pranks and whispered rumors, they decided to orchestrate something bigger, a trap, to humiliate her in front of the entire base. It was audacious, but desperation breeds boldness. They convinced themselves that a carefully timed logistics drill gone wrong would finally expose the new girl as incompetent and reaffirm their dominance. The plan was meticulous. Marcus manipulated a critical shipment schedule, while Jenna secretly swapped portions of operational data, ensuring that Evelyn would issue instructions that, on paper, appeared flawed. The errors were minor, but enough to create confusion among the junior officers. Every member of the clique played their part, eager to watch her stumble. They imagined the smirks and stifled laughter that would ripple across the base when Evelyn failed. For them, this was the pinnacle of their mischief, the day they proved that appearances mattered more than actual competence. As the drill commenced, chaos spread swiftly. Recruits scurried across the yard, unsure of where to position equipment. Orders were miscommunicated, some shouted, and some lost in the noise. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by the sharp clatter of metal and hurried footsteps. Evelyn stood at the edge of the yard, observing everything without haste. To the untrained eye, she appeared calm, almost detached, her hands folded neatly behind her back. She listened to the hurried orders, noted the discrepancies, and assessed the source of the confusion with unerring precision. Marcus exchanged a triumphant glance with Jenna. "This is it," he whispered, heart racing. "She'll crack under pressure. Watch." Jenna grinned, folding her arms, eager to witness the new girl's downfall. Every recruit involved in the drill stumbled, unsure of how to proceed. A minor equipment pile was positioned incorrectly. Officers shouted conflicting commands, and the once orderly formation had dissolved into chaos. Marcus felt a surge of smug satisfaction. Finally, he thought, she's just another rookie. But Evelyn's eyes were everywhere at once. She identified the root of the disorder within moments, recognizing the deliberate manipulations. Instead of panicking, she moved with methodical precision. Calmly, she addressed the nearest recruits, correcting their positions with succinct instructions. Her voice carried authority without arrogance, commanding attention effortlessly. She guided officers to reassess equipment alignment and recalibrate their actions, moving seamlessly through the confusion. The chaos persisted only briefly. Within minutes, Evelyn had restored order. Recruits stood in perfect formation, equipment realigned, and instructions clarified. The drill continued without further incident, now operating efficiently under her quiet supervision. Whispers rippled through the assembled personnel. Some looked on in awe. Others, like Marcus and Jenna, froze in disbelief. Their smug confidence had evaporated. Their trap, designed to humiliate her, had backfired spectacularly. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. "How?" he muttered, staring as Evelyn calmly issued additional instructions, optimizing the workflow further than the original plan had even intended. Jenna's smirk vanished completely. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The recruits, meanwhile, exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the skill and composure of the newcomer, who had transformed a potential disaster into a flawless operation. Evelyn did not chastise anyone. She did not call out Marcus or Jenna. Instead, she conducted a subtle debrief, asking questions about why errors occurred and encouraging recruits to think critically about communication, responsibility, and teamwork. Her approach was firm yet non-confrontational, teaching lessons without humiliating anyone. The junior officers quietly followed her guidance, gaining not only clarity but confidence. Her leadership became a living demonstration of how true authority manifests, not through intimidation or rank, but through competence, calm, and empathy. Meanwhile, Marcus and Jenna seethed. Every whispered plan they had orchestrated had been anticipated and neutralized without Evelyn's ever needing to raise her voice. They had underestimated her. In their minds, she was just a newcomer, inexperienced and fragile. In reality, she had seen their attempts coming long before they were executed. Every misstep they made, every small act of manipulation, had been observed, catalogued, and integrated into her understanding of their weaknesses. As the drill concluded and the recruits dispersed, Evelyn paused briefly, scanning the yard. She noted subtle changes. Officers who had initially doubted her were now watching with renewed respect, quietly absorbing her techniques. She had not needed to assert her authority overtly. Her actions had done the talking. Marcus and Jenna, however, still clung to denial. They had failed to humiliate her, but they had not yet realized that their attempts had provided invaluable insight into the dynamics of the base and into themselves. By evening, word of the drill's outcome spread across the base. Some whispered, admiring Evelyn's skill. Others were cautious, unsure how to interpret the incident. Marcus and Jenna convened privately, attempting to rationalize their failure. "We have to try again," Marcus said, voice low and tense. "We can't let her get ahead of us. She's too controlled, too perfect." Jenna shook her head. "It's more than that," she admitted reluctantly. "She's not just competent. She's unflappable. Nothing we do phases her. And every move we make, she's already seen it." The words carried the weight of realization, though neither fully grasped the extent of Evelyn's true position. They were still blinded by assumptions, unable to perceive that the new girl they sought to undermine was, in fact, the Admiral of the base itself. Evelyn, back in her quarters that night, reviewed the day carefully. She catalogued the actions of every officer involved, noting reactions, errors, and character traits revealed under stress. The trap had not been an obstacle, it had been a gift. In allowing Marcus and Jenna to reveal their insecurities and tactics, she had gained a deeper understanding of the base's internal dynamics. Every rumor, every whisper, every failed attempt at humiliation was now part of her mental map, a guide for future interventions. She reflected on the subtle power shifts that had already begun. Officers who had watched quietly during the drill had absorbed lessons in competence and calm authority. Recruits had gained confidence in their own abilities, inspired by Evelyn's methodical guidance. The base itself had taken its first steps toward transformation, guided by someone whose presence was at once invisible and commanding. As she prepared for sleep, Evelyn's thoughts turned to the future. Marcus and Jenna had underestimated her, but their miscalculation had provided clarity. Patience and observation would continue to guide her, allowing her to shape the base's culture without revealing her full hand until the right moment. She understood the delicate balance of influence. Correct too early, and resistance would rise. Wait too long, and chaos could spread. The challenge was timing, precision, and subtlety. Tomorrow promised new tests, some orchestrated by the clique, others arising naturally from the pressures of military life. Evelyn was ready. She had already turned the trap into an opportunity, gaining insight, respect, and authority without confrontation. And when the time came to reveal her true position, the effect would be undeniable, reshaping not just individual officers, but the very culture of the base itself. For Marcus and Jenna, the lesson was beginning to form, though they did not yet grasp its full magnitude. The new girl they had attempted to take down was no ordinary recruit. She was composed, strategic, and entirely in control, even in chaos. And the base, with all its rigid rules, hierarchy, and hidden rivalries, would soon learn the same truth. Evelyn closed her eyes, a faint smile touching her lips. The trap had failed, but the foundation had been laid. The base's future, and the fate of the arrogant officers who underestimated her, was already shifting. And when the moment came, they would understand exactly who they had been dealing with all along. The day began like any other, with the base buzzing in routine motion, officers conducting roll calls, recruits hurrying across the yard, and the distant hum of machinery echoing off the concrete and steel. Yet the tension was palpable. Whispers about Evelyn Hart had grown louder over the past days. Her composure, competence, and calm efficiency during the logistics drill had not gone unnoticed. While some officers admired her quietly, the clique of Marcus Doyle, Jenna Cross, and a few like-minded colleagues seethed. They still believed that she was a newcomer, that her calm exterior masked inexperience, and they were desperate to find a flaw to exploit. The administrative office had been transformed into a makeshift debriefing hall. Officers filed in, some curious, others wary. Evelyn entered last, moving with the same measured grace that had characterized her every step on the base since her arrival. She wore a simple uniform, sleeves rolled neatly, hair pinned back with military precision. But today, there was a subtle difference. Her posture radiated a quiet authority, a presence that seemed to command attention without a word. Marcus and Jenna exchanged nervous glances. They had planned for a controlled debrief, believing they had outmaneuvered her during the previous day's drill. "She can't possibly have prepared for this," Marcus whispered, voice tense. "We've set the stage. She has to crack." Evelyn stood at the front of the hall, hands folded in front of her, eyes scanning the room. The murmurs died gradually as she spoke, her voice calm, measured, and carrying an authority that no one could ignore. "Good morning," she began, allowing the silence to settle before continuing. "Today, we will discuss the recent logistics drill and evaluate performance. I expect honesty, accountability, and professionalism from every officer here." At first, the officers thought this was standard procedure. But as Evelyn's words unfolded, a subtle tension began to spread through the room. She began referencing precise actions, mistakes, and minor miscommunications, pointing out details that only someone with thorough knowledge of the base's operations could know. Marcus's jaw tightened. How could she have observed everything so closely? He had been sure of his trap, sure she would falter, but nothing seemed to affect her. Then came the moment of revelation. Evelyn straightened slightly, the faint gleam of authority flashing in her eyes. She reached into a side pocket and pulled out a neatly folded, insignia gold stripes and stars gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Slowly, deliberately, she pinned it to her uniform. The hall fell silent. "I am not who you think I am," she announced, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You are right about one thing. I am new here. But I am also the Admiral of this base. I am responsible for evaluating leadership, integrity, and performance at every level." Gasps filled the room. Officers froze mid-step, some dropping pens, others clutching clipboards tightly. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Jenna's eyes widened, disbelief written across her face. Their carefully orchestrated traps, their whispered rumors, their petty attempts at humiliation, they had been meaningless. They had been outmaneuvered without realizing it. Evelyn's gaze swept the room, calm but unwavering. "For days, I have observed not just your performance, but your behavior. I have noted integrity, competence, and courage, but also arrogance, pettiness, and the willingness to manipulate others for personal gain." Her words, deliberate and precise, landed like a series of quiet blows. "Marcus Doyle, Jenna Cross, your attempts to undermine a fellow officer have been documented and will be addressed accordingly." The room was silent, save for the nervous shuffling of papers and the faint hum of distant machinery. Marcus felt a rush of shame and disbelief. The realization hit him hard. He had underestimated her. He had believed himself in control, and yet Evelyn had controlled every step of the unfolding drama. Jenna looked at him, eyes wide, unable to form a coherent thought. Every sarcastic remark, every whispered plan, every attempt at manipulation had failed spectacularly. Evelyn continued, her voice steady and measured. "Leadership is not about appearances, nor is it about intimidation. It is about competence, calmness under pressure, and the ability to guide others toward a shared goal. True authority is earned, not assumed. Over the past days, I have seen how each of you responds to challenges, stress, and uncertainty. These observations will inform the changes necessary to strengthen this base." Some officers began to murmur among themselves, exchanging glances. The whispers were no longer about skepticism or rumors. They were about respect, admiration, and a dawning realization that this quiet, composed officer was in complete control. Evelyn's actions during the drills, her calm handling of chaos, and her methodical observations had all been subtle demonstrations of authority. The truth now shone clearly. She was not merely competent, she was the commanding officer, and her presence demanded respect. Marcus, still reeling, tried to form a protest, to claim some excuse or justification for his behavior. But Evelyn's gaze met his, calm, unwavering, and filled with quiet authority. It was a look that silenced even the loudest objections. He could see now how thoroughly he had misjudged her. Every move he had made, every attempt at undermining her, had been anticipated and neutralized. He had not been clever. He had been predictable. Evelyn turned to address the entire hall once more. "I am here not to punish out of spite, but to ensure that this base operates with integrity, efficiency, and respect. Mistakes will be addressed, but I also believe in correction, mentorship, and growth. The actions of today are a lesson for everyone here. Never underestimate anyone, and always lead by example. The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. Officers who had been skeptical now listened with renewed focus, some silently vowing to improve their own conduct. Recruits, previously intimidated by the clique's arrogance, now felt a quiet confidence, realizing that true authority could be calm, fair, and decisive. Even Marcus and Jenna could not escape the weight of the lesson. They had attempted to take down the new girl, and in doing so, had revealed their own flaws, while she had revealed her competence, control, and ultimate authority. After the debriefing, Evelyn dismissed the room, leaving officers and recruits to absorb the impact of the revelation. Some lingered, offering quiet acknowledgement or seeking guidance, while others, still processing, simply left in stunned silence. Marcus and Jenna remained behind for a moment, both chastened and humbled. For the first time, they experienced the discomfort of recognizing that their assumptions had been entirely wrong. Alone for a moment, Evelyn allowed herself a faint smile. The reveal had been necessary, not for personal satisfaction, but to establish clarity, set boundaries, and demonstrate the principles she valued. Authority was now undeniable, not merely inferred. The base had learned a lesson in humility, competence, and respect, and she had done so without raising her voice or resorting to public humiliation. As the day ended and the sun dipped below the horizon, the naval base settled into a quiet rhythm. Officers and recruits reflected on what had transpired. The story of the new girl, who had revealed herself as the Admiral, spreading quietly through the ranks. The lesson was clear. Appearances can deceive. Competence commands respect, and authority lies not in intimidation, but in knowledge, calmness, and integrity. Evelyn returned to her quarters, satisfied. Marcus and Jenna had learned their lesson, and the base as a whole had witnessed the subtle power of leadership. The days ahead would continue to test them all. But the foundation had been laid: respect for true authority, the consequences of arrogance, and the recognition that underestimating anyone could lead to unexpected revelations. And for Marcus and Jenna, the realization lingered. They had attempted to take down the new girl, but the new girl had already been running the show from the very beginning. The day after Evelyn Hart revealed herself as the base's admiral, a hushed tension settled over the naval installation. Officers and recruits moved with a newfound awareness, their previous assumptions shattered. The whispers about the new girl had transformed into murmurs of respect and quiet awe. Marcus Doyle and Jenna Cross, once smug and overconfident, now walked with a heavy awareness of their misjudgment. Evelyn's calm authority had not only corrected the immediate disruption, but had also exposed the flaws in the base's social dynamics, revealing arrogance and pettiness where competence and discipline should have prevailed. Evelyn wasted no time in addressing the consequences of behavior and reinforcing accountability. She convened formal meetings with Marcus, Jenna, and several other officers who had participated in undermining her in subtle or overt ways. The room was quiet, tense, and expectant. She did not scold with anger, nor did she use the meetings as a stage to humiliate. Instead, her tone was calm, measured, and unwavering, a reflection of the principles she valued most: integrity, responsibility, and growth. Leadership is measured not just by decisions, but by character, she began, her gaze sweeping the room. Each of you was observed over the past week. Actions, words, and intentions were noted. Some have shown initiative and professionalism. Others have demonstrated behavior inconsistent with the standards expected here. Her words were deliberate, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The choices you make, even in minor situations, affect the operational efficiency of the base and the morale of those around you. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, recalling the series of traps and schemes he had orchestrated. His arrogance had been replaced by self-doubt as Evelyn's calm words cut through the haze of his previous assumptions. He had underestimated her, misjudged her composure, and failed to recognize her authority. Jenna, seated beside him, fidgeted. With her uniform, unable to look directly at Evelyn, feeling a mixture of guilt and disbelief. Evelyn continued, her voice firm but not harsh. Marcus Doyle, Jenna Cross, your actions during drills and operations have revealed lapses in judgment, ethical standards, and teamwork. These behaviors cannot continue unchecked. Reprimands will be issued, and corrective measures will follow. This is not to punish for its own sake, but to instill responsibility and ensure the base functions with integrity and efficiency. She laid out formal corrective actions with precision. Marcus and Jenna would undergo leadership evaluations, mentoring sessions, and ethics training designed to address the weaknesses their behavior had revealed. Evelyn emphasized that these measures were intended not to humiliate, but to foster growth. True leadership, she explained, is built on the foundation of accountability. Mistakes, when acknowledged and corrected, become lessons that strengthen both character and command. As the meetings concluded, other officers who had observed Evelyn's interventions expressed quiet approval. Many had feared confrontation, uncertain of where their loyalties should lie, but Evelyn's calm approach inspired reflection rather than fear. They began to understand that leadership could be both firm and fair, authoritative yet empathetic. Her ability to address misconduct without resorting to public shaming created a ripple of respect across the base. Evelyn's reforms extended beyond individual reprimands. She implemented mentorship programs designed to pair experienced officers with junior personnel, emphasizing knowledge transfer, guidance, and collaboration. Officers who had previously operated in isolation were encouraged to communicate more, openly and supportively, fostering a culture of cooperation rather than competition. These programs began slowly, but the subtle changes were noticeable. Recruits gained confidence. Errors were corrected more quickly, and the base's overall efficiency improved. Even the clique members, Marcus and Jenna, began to shift under Evelyn's guidance. Marcus, humbled by his misjudgment, slowly embraced the opportunity to learn from mentorship sessions, realizing the depth of skill and integrity required to lead effectively. Jenna, initially resistant, began participating in team-building exercises and open discussions, gaining insight into the value of accountability and humility. Evelyn's approach allowed them to retain dignity while confronting their shortcomings, turning potential humiliation into constructive growth. By midweek, the effects of Evelyn's interventions were visible across the base. Communication improved among officers and recruits. Orders were executed with greater clarity and efficiency. Small acts of collaboration replaced petty rivalry. Evelyn moved through the base with quiet observation, offering guidance, adjusting strategies, and ensuring that corrective measures were effective without asserting dominance unnecessarily. Her presence was both commanding and reassuring, a balance that reinforced respect without fear. In addition to internal reforms, Evelyn emphasized the importance of ethical conduct and moral responsibility. She conducted workshops on integrity, decision-making under pressure, and conflict resolution, drawing on her extensive experience as an admiral. Officers and recruits alike were encouraged to reflect on personal values, biases, and motivations, fostering a culture where accountability was intertwined with self-awareness. These sessions, while challenging, were transformative. Individuals who had once focused on ego or personal gain began to appreciate the broader responsibility inherent in military service. As the week progressed, Evelyn also began informal evaluations of interpersonal dynamics. She identified officers who excelled not only in technical skill, but in collaboration, mentorship, and moral judgment. These individuals were quietly encouraged to step into leadership roles, subtly shifting the base's culture toward competence, trust, and respect. Evelyn recognized that true transformation required more than addressing misconduct. It required nurturing leadership potential and empowering those who demonstrated integrity and capability. By the end of the week, the base had undergone a quiet but profound shift. Marcus and Jenna, though still learning, had embraced new perspectives on teamwork, accountability, and humility. Recruits felt a renewed sense of confidence and purpose, inspired by Evelyn's measured guidance and fairness. Officers who had previously relied on authority to intimidate now recognized the power of competence, calmness, and ethical leadership. The base was more disciplined, more efficient, and more cohesive, a living testament to Evelyn's philosophy and skill. Evelyn herself remained vigilant, aware that true leadership required constant observation and adaptation. She understood that transformation was ongoing, and that vigilance against arrogance, negligence, and unethical behavior would always be necessary. Yet the initial foundation had been laid. The base now operated with a clarity and cohesion that had been missing before her arrival. That evening, as Evelyn reviewed reports in her quarters, she allowed herself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. The day's interventions, evaluations, and mentorship programs had begun to bear fruit. The officers who had once sought to undermine her were now participants in their own growth, learning lessons that extended far beyond a single drill or petty act of mischief. The ripple effects of accountability, integrity, and leadership were taking root, reshaping the culture of the base in subtle but lasting ways. Evelyn reflected on the path ahead. Change was never instantaneous, nor was it guaranteed. But by addressing misconduct with fairness, fostering growth through mentorship, and modeling the principles of integrity and competence, she had begun a transformation that would endure. The base was no longer merely a collection of officers and recruits. It was becoming a community built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. As she closed her reports and prepared for rest, Evelyn's mind lingered on Marcus and Jenna. They had been given an opportunity to grow, and some seeds of humility and reflection had already taken root. She allowed herself a faint, approving smile. Leadership was not about punishment, but about guiding others to recognize their potential, and when necessary, their flaws. In this, she had succeeded. The night was quiet, the base settling into an uneasy but hopeful calm. Evelyn knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of character, and continued opportunities to shape the culture of the base. But for now, the first wave of accountability had been delivered, and the foundations for lasting change had been established. Under her watch, the base would not just operate, it would thrive. And as Evelyn finally closed her eyes, the faintest trace of a smile remained on her face. The new girl had revealed herself not only as the Admiral, but as a leader capable of transforming a community, instilling accountability, and fostering respect lessons that would echo far beyond the walls of the base itself. The days following Evelyn Hart's formal assertion of authority were quiet but charged with anticipation. Officers and recruits alike were adjusting to the new dynamic that had reshaped the base in ways both subtle and profound. Marcus Doyle and Jenna Cross, once the architects of disruption and mischief, now found themselves confronted with the consequences of their actions. The transition was neither instantaneous nor easy. Pride and ingrained habits die slowly, and the two officers struggled to reconcile their previous arrogance with the lessons Evelyn had imparted. The base had begun to operate under a new rhythm, one defined by competence, communication, and mutual respect. Evelyn moved through corridors and drill yards with her characteristic calmness, observing interactions, listening to concerns, and providing guidance where necessary. Her presence no longer invited challenge or speculation. It commanded trust. Even the most skeptical officers had begun to accept that she was both observant and decisive, capable of transforming chaos into order without confrontation. Marcus, who had been particularly resistant to mentorship, began attending sessions reluctantly. Initially, he saw them as obligations, an intrusion into his schedule. But as he engaged with Evelyn's guidance, he began to understand the depth of her leadership philosophy. Competence was not merely about following orders, it was about anticipating needs, managing personnel, and acting ethically under pressure. Marcus started applying these lessons in small ways, providing clarity during drills, listening more actively to his subordinates, and questioning his own assumptions before acting. Jenna's journey was more internal. She had always prided herself on agility, cunning, and social intelligence. But under Evelyn's steady guidance, she realized that cleverness alone did not constitute leadership. True influence required empathy, patience, and foresight. Her previous attempts to manipulate and undermine Evelyn had been met not with retaliation, but with observation and strategic subtlety. This lesson, humbling yet profound, forced Jenna to reconsider her approach to authority. She began mentoring junior recruits, fostering collaboration, and setting an example of professionalism rather than competitiveness. The transformation of the clique set a powerful precedent for the entire base. Observers took note of the shift. Officers who had previously competed for attention or influence began working together more harmoniously. Recruits noticed the change as well. Their training became less about fearing reprimand and more about learning, growing, and contributing to the mission of the base. Evelyn's philosophy, that authority is earned through competence and integrity, was slowly becoming embedded in the base's culture. Evelyn reinforced this cultural shift through carefully structured initiatives. Team exercises were designed to highlight collaboration over competition. Debriefings emphasized constructive critique rather than assigning blame. Mentorship pairs were rotated to ensure that all personnel could learn from diverse perspectives. Her subtle interventions fostered a sense of shared responsibility, ensuring that lessons of accountability, humility, and leadership were internalized across the ranks. One afternoon, Marcus approached Evelyn with a question that reflected both his growing humility and his desire to improve. "Admiral Hart," he began, careful with his words, I realize now how much I misjudged the situation. I want to understand how to lead more effectively, not just follow orders." Evelyn regarded him silently for a moment, her expression calm but attentive. "Leadership," she said finally, "is not about asserting dominance or proving yourself. It is about understanding those you lead, anticipating challenges, and fostering an environment where competence and integrity can flourish. If you can internalize that, you will not only earn respect, you will strengthen the base as a whole." Marcus nodded, absorbing the advice. For the first time in his career, he felt the weight of responsibility in a constructive sense, understanding that mistakes were opportunities for growth rather than simply failures to avoid. Meanwhile, Jenna had her own moment of insight during a training exercise with junior recruits. Observing their struggles, she felt an unfamiliar sense of satisfaction in guiding rather than competing. When one young recruit faltered, she offered encouragement and practical advice, watching with quiet pride as the trainee regained confidence and performed successfully. For Jenna, this was a turning point, the realization that influence could be wielded positively, without manipulation or subterfuge. The impact of these changes was evident across the base. Communication became more efficient, mistakes were corrected faster, and morale improved significantly. Evelyn, walking through the drill yard one morning, noticed officers assisting recruits with patience and clarity, traits that had been absent before her arrival. The base had become not just more functional, but more cohesive, a living testament to the power of thoughtful, ethical leadership. Evelyn's subtle oversight ensured that these transformations were sustainable. She monitored progress, provided feedback discreetly, and addressed lapses in behavior before they could escalate. She allowed individuals to take ownership of their growth, intervening only when necessary. Her strategy was neither authoritarian nor passive. It was deliberate, measured, and deeply effective. By the end of the week, a formal recognition ceremony was held. Evelyn addressed the assembled personnel, acknowledging the efforts of officers and recruits who had demonstrated growth, professionalism, and commitment. Marcus and Jenna, seated prominently, received commendations for their progress. The moment was symbolic, highlighting the transformative power of accountability, humility, and guidance. In her speech, Evelyn emphasized the lessons she had imparted. Leadership is not about ego, nor is it about fear. It is about competence, integrity, and the ability to uplift others. Today, we recognize those who have embraced these principles, and we commit to sustaining a culture of respect, collaboration, and excellence. Applause filled the hall, not merely for recognition, but for the shared acknowledgement of growth and transformation. Marcus and Jenna, humbled and motivated, exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. They had learned that leadership required more than cleverness or manipulation. It required character, empathy, and dedication. After the ceremony, recruits and officers alike lingered, inspired by Evelyn's example. Conversations reflected the change. Discussions of strategy, cooperation, and personal growth replaced whispers of gossip and rivalry. The base, once fractured by egos and hidden agendas, had begun to function as a unified entity. Evelyn's leadership had shifted not only the authority structure, but the very culture of the installation. That evening, Evelyn reflected on the journey thus far. She recognized the transformation was ongoing, but the foundation had been laid. The clique had learned humility, the officers had embraced competence and collaboration, and the recruits had gained confidence in their roles. The base now operated not out of fear, but out of respect for each other, for their mission, and for the principles of ethical leadership. As she prepared for the night, Evelyn allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The challenges she had faced, from subtle sabotage to open defiance, had been met with patience, observation, and strategic guidance. She had revealed her true identity, implemented accountability, and nurtured growth, all while maintaining composure and fostering respect. The night was still, the base quiet under the fading light of dusk. Evelyn gazed out across the drill yard, imagining the days ahead. More challenges would come, as they always did in a military environment, but the culture she had begun to cultivate would endure. Officers and recruits had learned that leadership is earned, not assumed, that respect is built through competence and integrity, and that even the most disruptive individuals could find redemption when guided wisely. For Marcus and Jenna, the lesson was now fully internalized. They had walked a path from arrogance to humility, from mischief to responsibility, and from defiance to collaboration. Under Evelyn's leadership, they had discovered that true strength was measured not by manipulation or dominance, but by character, accountability, and the ability to inspire growth in others. And for Evelyn Hart, the Admiral who had quietly commanded authority from the moment of her arrival, the base had become more than a command. It had become a community shaped by her vision, discipline, and unwavering belief in the potential for transformation. Months had passed since Evelyn Hart had revealed herself as the Admiral of the base. Time had softened the shock of her initial disclosure, and the base had undergone a profound transformation, not just in operations, but in its very culture. Officers and recruits alike moved with confidence, clarity, and a sense of shared purpose. The lessons of accountability, humility, and competence had taken root, extending far beyond the individuals who had once attempted to undermine her. The base was no longer merely functional. It was thriving, a model of efficiency, cohesion, and moral integrity. The morning sun rose over the drill yard, casting long shadows across the meticulously organized equipment and the rows of officers assembled for inspection. Evelyn walked along the rows with measured grace, observing with a critical yet approving eye. She noted the precision of formations, the attentiveness of recruits, and the calm confidence of officers who had once doubted her authority. Each detail reflected the collective growth that had occurred under her guidance. Marcus Doyle, once consumed by arrogance and misjudgment, now stood at attention with a composed demeanor, his posture reflecting the discipline he had learned to respect. His eyes met Evelyn's briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the lessons internalized, the humility earned, and the trust that had replaced skepticism. The transformation was evident. He had evolved from a brash, competitive officer into someone capable of leading with integrity and foresight. Jenna Cross, similarly transformed, walked alongside him. Her mischievous smirk had been replaced by a thoughtful, deliberate expression, tempered by a newfound understanding of responsibility and leadership. She had embraced her mentorship role with enthusiasm, guiding recruits with patience and clarity. The base had benefited from her intelligence and agility, now channeled toward constructive and collaborative purposes. Evelyn paused at the center of the yard, allowing the morning air to settle and the murmurs to quiet. Her presence, calm and commanding, drew attention naturally. Officers straightened, recruits held their positions, and the subtle energy of respect and anticipation filled the space. Evelyn's eyes scanned the assembled personnel, taking in the collective growth, the subtle changes in posture, demeanor, and confidence that had transformed the environment into one of unity and purpose. Over the past months, she began, her voice measured but carrying across the yard, this base has undergone not just operational improvements, but a transformation of character. Each of you has contributed to this success through effort, reflection, and the willingness to learn. Leadership is not about a single person, nor about rank alone. It is about fostering competence, integrity, and collaboration at every level. She paused, allowing the words to settle. Marcus and Jenna, standing at attention, felt the weight of her praise and its subtle challenge. Evelyn's leadership had not merely corrected behavior, it had inspired personal growth, cultivated responsibility, and instilled a sense of purpose that transcended individual ambition. Marcus Doyle, Jenna Cross. Evelyn continued, her gaze firm but not unkind. Your journey over the past weeks exemplifies the possibility of transformation. From actions driven by ego and misjudgment, you have evolved into officers capable of guiding others with integrity and clarity. Take this lesson forward, not just for yourselves, but for every officer and recruit you encounter. The acknowledgement was quiet but profound. Marcus and Jenna both felt the weight of their own growth, the recognition of mistakes, and the pride of having overcome them. For the first time, their ambition was no longer self-serving, it was aligned with the mission, the team, and the larger purpose of the base. Evelyn then addressed the entire assembly. To every officer and recruit, let this moment serve as a reminder. Respect is earned, integrity is maintained through consistent action, and leadership is demonstrated through the growth of those you guide. The strength of this base is not in its machinery, its technology, or its plans alone. It is in you. Each of you has the potential to shape its future, and it is your choices that will define its legacy. Applause rippled through the yard, not merely as a response to words, but as an acknowledgement of shared understanding. Recruits whispered among themselves, inspired by the realization that competence and integrity could coexist with authority, respect, and opportunity for personal growth. Officers exchanged nods, recognizing how far the base had come from internal tension and petty rivalries to a cohesive, respectful, and efficient community. In the following weeks, Evelyn continued her work with the same measured precision. Mentorship programs expanded, cross-department exercises were implemented, and evaluations emphasized growth, teamwork, and ethical decision-making. Marcus and Jenna, now fully committed to their roles as leaders, took active part in these programs, reinforcing the cultural shift and modeling behavior for junior recruits. Their presence served as a living example of the power of humility, accountability, and learning from mistakes. The base's operational efficiency reached new heights. Drills were conducted seamlessly, communications flowed clearly across all ranks, and morale was at an all-time high. Evelyn's approach had proven that leadership could transform not just individuals, but entire communities when executed with insight, patience, and unwavering commitment to principle. One afternoon, Evelyn walked alone through the yard, reflecting on the journey from her arrival as the new girl to her role as the Admiral. She noted the subtle gestures of respect she received from officers, the quiet confidence of recruits performing flawlessly, and the harmony that had replaced the previous discord. It was a testament to strategy, observation, and the power of guiding change through action rather than coercion. Her thoughts turned briefly to the clique that had attempted to undermine her. Marcus and Jenna had learned their lessons well, but more importantly, they had become advocates of the principles she valued. Their journey from disruption to collaboration symbolized the possibility of redemption, the impact of mentorship, and the enduring effect of ethical leadership. Evelyn knew that mistakes would continue to happen, that challenges would arise, but the foundation she had built was resilient, rooted in shared values and mutual respect. As the sun set over the base, casting long golden hues across the yard, Evelyn allowed herself a quiet sense of satisfaction. The new girl who had arrived with calm observation and quiet competence had reshaped an entire community. Authority had been revealed not through intimidation or ego, but through skill, insight, and ethical guidance. She smiled faintly, recalling the initial chaos, the whispered rumors, and the attempts at sabotage. Every challenge had been an opportunity, every misstep a lesson, and every moment of doubt a chance to demonstrate true leadership. The base was no longer divided. It was united, efficient, and thriving. Later, in her quarters, Evelyn documented reports, evaluated personnel progress, and reflected on the cultural changes she had instilled. She knew that her work would continue indefinitely. Leadership was an ongoing process, not a destination. Yet, the lasting impact was clear. Officers had learned to lead with integrity. Recruits had learned to trust in competence, and the base operated as a cohesive, purpose-driven entity. The legacy of Evelyn Hart, the Admiral who arrived as the new girl, was now evident in every corner of the base. Her presence had been transformative, her methods subtle but profound, and her philosophy enduring. She had turned arrogance into humility, misjudgment into reflection, and chaos into disciplined excellence. And as the night deepened over the base, Evelyn knew that the ultimate measure of leadership was not in the control one held, but in the growth one inspired. The new girl had become the Admiral, and under her guidance, the base had become a model of transformation, integrity, and lasting excellence. The story of Evelyn Hart would be told quietly, in whispers and in lessons, throughout the ranks of the base for years to come. She had proven that appearances are deceiving, authority is earned, and leadership is defined not by power, but by the ability to elevate others. The new girl had not only survived the tests, she had created a legacy that would endure long after. She walked through the drill yard one final time,